All right, good day to everyone. Welcome to today's Comic-Con at Home panel, Zombies and Coronavirus, Planning for the Next Big Outbreak, presented by the Comic-Con at Home program. Today we'll be featuring a panel with Max Brooks, Dr. Gigi Gronvall, Dr. Jarod Hanson, Dr. Gregory Koblentz, and Dr. Shanna Ratnesar-Shumate. I'll introduce all of our panelists here in just a moment. As we introduce the panel today, please keep in mind that the information and the opinions that are expressed today from the panelists are those of the panelists themselves, and not necessarily the organizations that they work for, nor that of Comic-Con International. Today's panelists include Dr. Jarod Hanson, the Chief of Staff and the Executive Officer at the United States Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Disease at Fort Detrick. He completed his Doctor of Veterinary Medicine degree in 2006 at the University of Minnesota, and subsequently focused on population health and disease eradication programs for a large swine producer. Dr. Hanson completed his PhD in infectious disease at the University of Georgia in 2016 with a focus on influenza A virus. Dr. Hanson has lectured on large animal virology for the University of Georgia College of Veterinary Medicine and at local, state, and national veterinary meetings on a variety of topics. He also serves as an associate editor for ProMed Mail, a reporting service dedicated to disseminating outbreak news with particular emphasis on advancing a One Health approach to disease reporting and global disease mapping. Dr. Hanson is also an adjunct faculty member at the University of Maryland School of Medicine. Dr. Shanna Ratnesar-Shumate holds a PhD in chemical, biochemical, and environmental engineering from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. She is an expert in the field of aerobiology and aerosol science with over 15 years of experience studying transmission of infectious pathogens via the airborne route as a government researcher. She also serves as an adjunct faculty member at the University of Nebraska Medical Center and is a fellow of Johns Hopkins University's Emerging Leaders in Biosecurity Initiative. Dr. Gigi Gronvall is a senior scholar at the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security and an associate professor in the Department of Environmental Health and Engineering at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Dr. Gronvall is the author of the book Synthetic Biology, Safety, Security, and Promise, and Preparing for Bioterrorism, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation's Leadership in Biosecurity. She is a member of the Novel and Exceptional Technology and Research Advisory Committee, which provides recommendations to the NIH Director, and a member of the Threat Reduction Advisory Committee, which provides the Secretary of Defense with independent advice about the risks posed by nuclear, biological, chemical, and conventional threats. Dr. Gronvall received a BS in biology from Indiana University Bloomington, received her PhD from Johns Hopkins University for her work in T-cell receptor and MHC1 interactions, and was a postdoctoral fellow at the U.S. Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Disease at Fort Detrick, Maryland. Dr. Greg Koblentz is an associate professor at George Mason University Schar School of Policy and Government. He is also director of the Biodefense Graduate Program, which has been preventing the zombie apocalypse since 2003. His research and teaching focus on understanding the causes and consequences of the proliferation of nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons to state, non-state, and undead actors. Dr. Koblentz is a member of the Scientist Working Group on Biological and Chemical Security at the Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation in Washington, D.C. In his free time, he enjoys writing books like Living Weapons, Biological Warfare and International Security, and reading books and watching movies about apocalyptic threats to humanity, ranging from zombies to aliens to pandemics. And finally, Max Brooks is the author of such novels as World War Z, The Zombie Survival Guide, The Harlem Hellfighters, and his most recent book is Devolution, a first-hand account of the Rainier Sasquatch Massacre, just released on June 16th by Random House Publishing. Max is a senior non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council and the Modern War Institute at West Point. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being with us tonight. I really appreciate it. And thank you to our audience from George Mason, from Johns Hopkins, and also from the National Defense University for joining us as our representative audience for our Comic-Con constituency. First, I want to mention that threats are all around us, and we have had our slew of them of recent memory. We're right now dealing with the coronavirus pandemic that has obviously hit the United States especially hard. But our dealing with coronaviruses in contemporary times really goes back to the 2002-2004 SARS pandemic that happened starting also in the China-Hong Kong area. That pandemic itself produced 8,096 tested cases and 811 deaths with a case fatality rate of 10%. So if we look at that, and you can see some of the same issues and concerns that we had in that outbreak in 2003 and 2004 rear its head again during the coronavirus outbreak that has happened in the last 6 months. On 16 November 2002, the first outbreak of SARS began in Guangdong province, which borders Hong Kong. The People's Republic of China notified the World Health Organization about that outbreak on 10 February 2003, which was actually about 4 months after the initial outbreak happened. And it peaked in mid-February 2003 in China itself. However, there's questions as to whether or not earlier notification would have helped in that case, because subsequently there were 806 cases of infection and 34 deaths reported in that same location as a result of a later spike that happened. Early in the epidemic, there was issues with the reporting of that information in the press, delay reporting to the WHO, and initially did not provide information outside of Guangdong province, which caused problems with the response. Later on, we had the H1N1 pandemic that happened in 2009. There we had approximately 14,286 deaths confirmed. However, it's likely that the death rate was actually much higher, possibly in the range of 284,000 deaths, with a total of possibly up to 700 million persons infected, according to the WHO. So again, there's an example of a case where the spread might have been much further than we anticipated because testing may not have caught up to the actual number of infections. In 2013, we had the West Africa Ebola outbreak that happened primarily in Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia. There you had 28,646 confirmed cases and approximately 11,323 deaths for a case fatality rate of 39%. Just 4 years later, in Kivu, you had the Ebola epidemic that ended up affecting the Congo and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and also Uganda. In this case, which that pandemic or that epidemic was just recently declared ended on the 25th of June, you had a total of 3,470 confirmed cases and 2,280 deaths for a case fatality rate of 66%, quite a bit higher than what you saw in the West African Ebola outbreak. And then we come to the challenge that we've had for the past 5 to 6 months, which is the COVID-19 outbreak. As of today, Johns Hopkins is tracking over 10,199,000 confirmed cases worldwide, with a total number of 502,947 deaths, and that number continues to climb. That gives us a case fatality rate worldwide of approximately 4.9%, which is also the case fatality rate that we're seeing based on testing here in the United States thus far. Even in the United Kingdom and Spain, we're seeing case fatality rates somewhere on the order of 13 to 14%. Much of the problem that we've seen in these cases with the tracking and the testing has to do with the ability to ramp up and to be able to get the adequate amount of equipment and the adequate amount of material to the testing sites, and also the backing of the governments in these cases in order to be able to make that testing regime happen. Deaths in these cases are often reported differently. In some places, if there is a suspected coronavirus involvement that is secondary to some other problem that the patient has, it's counted as coronavirus death. In some other places, it's not. So that gives us uneven reporting in terms of the fatalities that happen with coronavirus. So those all present several cases of pretty significant infectious disease spread that we've had worldwide, or at least definitely regionally, with the potential to spread worldwide over the past 15 to 20 years. And that leads us to ask the question, where do we go from here? What lessons do we take out of these recent pandemics, these recent infectious disease issues that we've had? And how do we translate that into dealing with what the next known pandemic might be, possibly a resurgence of coronavirus in the fall, or even the uptick that we're seeing recently in several states, or the unknown? What happens if it's a infectious disease with a case fatality rate of 100%? What if it's Solanum, the virus that is mentioned by Max Brooks in his book World War Z, and it has a case fatality rate of 100%. Everybody who's infected ends up becoming a zombie. There are many steps that we can take out of science fact that we could apply to a situation like that. However, I don't think we've ever really had a good discussion of where we go from the lessons learned that we have from these types of incidents to where we would go with the ultimate infectious disease outbreak, the one of science fiction, which is the zombie outbreak. And the intent tonight is to actually have a discussion about the lessons that we should be learning and applying to future pandemic outbreaks, the way that we can approach these, and what the government and nonprofits and private industry can do to help us with that. But also, we could take that discussion further and say, how would we deal with the zombie apocalypse? We can read the Zombie Survival Guide for some tips on that, but let's get some scientists in the room and we can have a good discussion about how we might practically solve that kind of a problem here, based on the research that they've done and the types of trends that they've seen. So with that, I'm going to ask a couple of scene setter questions, and I'm going to ask our panelists one by one if they want to give a few minutes of their opinion, talk a little bit about what they've researched in the past, and what kind of lessons we should be learning from these recent outbreaks, applying to the unknowns of the future. So based on what we've seen in recent history, how do we use our successes and our failures to address pandemic disease in preparing for the next pandemic? How do we plan for the unknown? How can we better address public health concerns during an outbreak while still mitigating economic and social concerns? Because I know that's always an issue, especially of late when we've had to shut down many businesses. And additionally, how can we deal with the ultimate pandemic of science fiction, the zombie outbreak? And what I will do is I will ask to start with Jarod Hanson from USAMRIID. Can you go ahead and give us a little bit about your background? Maybe talk a little bit about the research that you've done, some of the lessons learned that you've had, and what you think the application of those lessons learned could be to a future outbreak.
Hey, good evening, all. So I think it's an interesting question, for one, because I really question whether we've learned any lessons along the way. If you look back at all of these outbreaks, not only the ones Justin mentioned, but we've had multiple animal disease outbreaks that have spanned the last 10 years, including coronaviruses show up in swine in particular, but also many other species. I really don't think we've learned anything thus far. And what we've learned with COVID specifically is that this is the ultimate group project gone bad. We can't get people to stay home. We can't get people to wear masks. So how do we expect to improve upon that when you really have nowhere to go but up, in my opinion? I mean, we've really failed, especially as a country in the US, failed on a scale unimaginable a few years ago. If you think about how quickly MERS and SARS in particular, the first versions, were stomped out in Asia and in Saudi Arabia compared to what we're dealing with now. I mean, we clearly have screwed up things that we never imagined as pandemic planners or as public health planners that we would have screwed up before. We all assumed things would be successful. We all assumed there would be good government strategies. And really the question is, how did we screw up so badly as a collective? And this isn't just across the US, this is across the globe. I mean, there were so many missteps along the way, and there continue to be. So how do we take that away? The takeaway should be, we only can go up from where we are right now. And maybe this time we'll learn. Maybe this time we'll learn that it's going to cost us, just in the US, $8 trillion to have learned our lesson about how we should plan for things in the future, how we shouldn't just assume this won't happen to us, or that we'll be able to technologically leap ahead of this, because that's clearly been where we failed. We haven't been able to keep up testing. You can't implement public health policy without testing. So I think if you start there as how do we succeed in the future, we actually listen to the public health experts. We listen to the people that actually say we need to stay home, we need to stop transmission, because we were doing that fairly effectively, and then we've sort of given all those gains away in the recent past year, last couple of months. The other thing you have to sort of take away from this is how little public health costs relative to the ultimate harm that can come out of it. We've gotten very lucky with pandemics in the recent history, whether it was Ebola or 2009 flu. And I think I've spent a lot of time researching influenza in particular, and we've gotten lucky with those outbreaks. They've not been severe. They've not had the mortality rate that even COVID has had. So how do we take that and move forward and say, all right, it's time to look at what those outbreaks cost and move on and say, okay, we should have learned from those minor outbreaks, relatively minor in terms of cost and really the fatalities that came out of them, and moved on to, now we can see what can really happen. And this doesn't even include the zombie apocalypse level of death where you'd have 100% mortality. So we really need to take those lessons and advance far beyond where we are now, because this has just been an utter failure for the last 6 months.
Okay, thanks, Jarod. I appreciate that. And I'll probably ask a few questions as we're done to kind of update on what you've already presented. I'm gonna ask to go to Gigi now. Dr. Gronvall. Interestingly enough, the first line of your book in synthetic biology was, "Every day is a biology news day." And obviously that's very true right now. If we're getting so much information out there, if we're getting so much information about what's going on, the kind of treatments that we should be working on, the vaccines, everything like that. And we've seen this happen time and time again. What are we not learning from that? What are we not taking away from that we should be applying here?
Cool. Well, thank you very much for having me here and to answer what we should be doing for the next pandemic, and whether it's like a rabies-like virus that turns people into zombies or some other deadly pathogen. Like you were saying, biology, every day is a biology news day, and science, biological science is really the only way out of this kind of mess. And so we need to support it and make sure it's there when we need it. The whole thing has been a disaster, like Jarod said, but the science has been the most hopeful part of this. Within a couple of months, we had thousands of uploaded viral sequences. We had thousands of scientific papers. And within 4 months, we had 160 vaccine and therapy candidates in the pipeline, which is amazing. And a lot of this is because of advances in science from SARS. We now don't need to worry about getting virus samples to researchers. They can download the sequences and work from there. Scientists are more collaborative. They are sharing their information through preprints, and that has been really successful overall, although it has some problems. When science hits the clinic, it's a little bit more, it slows things down. And so we need to think about ways to get faster and more efficient at that. A lot of this is just the inevitable part of, being in the clinic. If people are more complicated than animal models, people are more complicated than cells in a laboratory. But still, there's no excuse for it taking so long for us to learn that, like, hydroxychloroquine was not a good drug for COVID. So we need to get better at doing, taking advantage of the patient data that we can, and doing randomized clinical trials a lot earlier in the process. And if we have to change the way that our health data is aggregated or taken from our healthcare system, then we have to do that, and that's going to be important for the future. Another thing is that people are really expect to have their health data. And we have Fitbits, we're used to having our data, but this has been a real problem with not only diagnostic tests, but now I spent a lot of time talking about antibody tests. People want to know if they had COVID before. And because there was no medical decisions for that, FDA just very lightly regulated this. And now it's a disaster. People are paying hundreds of dollars for information that might not be accurate. And so that's a real problem. Something that we need to fix, science and health security expertise need to be, at the highest levels of governing. It shouldn't just be something that CDC does or something that NIH does. It needs to be like as important as nuclear weapons to the training of people who are governing our country, and they need to know what it is because of the impact that it's had on our nation and the world. And finally, we need a bipartisan commission like the 9/11 Commission to figure out what we did and how we could do things better. The 9/11 Commission, it made recommendations that were like small things for communication to big things to changing the way the FBI went after after terrorist threats. And we needed something similar to that. Like the tagline for the 9/11 Commission was that that happened because people had a failure of imagination, but we haven't. That's not the case here, because we've been imagining this kind of crisis again and again, and we've seen it play out in different ways, and this has been a failure to act. And we know that even though we can't know the day or the hour, we're going to have another crisis like this in the future, so we need to get prepared. So thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. This isn't the last time we're going to see something like this, far from it. So obviously there's definitely some soul searching that needs to happen in order to improve outcomes in the future. All right, I'm going to move over to Shanna. Your background in aerobiology is sort of an interesting one, because you're looking at the ways that infectious diseases spread. And I guess I would pose the question to you this way: what are we missing in the pure science part of this? Not the application of vaccines or countermeasures, but in the way that we're actually studying the infectious diseases themselves. Did we lose you, Shanna?
It would help if I unmuted myself, right? So you can hear me. So one of the things that I find is actually missing in terms of the pure science is I think a real appreciation for how interdisciplinary these fields really are and how much the scientific community really needs to rely on sort of the different disciplines to bring it all together. I think you'll very often find that there are clusters of virologists who only necessarily understand the virology portion, but there is a lot of physics and chemistry and thermodynamics that's going into a lot of the disease transmission. And I'm seeing a lot of the research that's coming out now, a lot of the papers that are coming out now are sort of bringing in all of these different types of expertise to really try to understand what is contributing to person-to-person transmission, from expulsion events of droplets and fluid dynamics and things like that. And so really sort of trying to get to the mechanistic understanding of what really is contributing to sort of these pathogens moving from person to person. And if you sort of watch what's going on in the news, there's this huge scientific debate. Is this an airborne disease? Is it not an airborne disease? And when this first started to sort of develop, WHO and CDC sort of had this stance, okay, it's not airborne, so, you know, please don't necessarily hoard face masks. And now you're seeing this huge dynamic shift where everybody's wearing face masks, and we're really trying to push the community harder to make sure that people are protecting themselves and protecting each other from spreading. And so I think that's sort of one of the things that's been missing and that I'm starting to see come together now as we move forward. And trying to understand and sort of put the brakes on this as it continues to spread. One thing that I personally think it has to change from a community standpoint is that there's so much mistrust of scientists, and specifically in the US. And I think getting to a point where we can make sure the next generation understands that science, the whole point is to help save lives and to help people. We're not here to take away people's rights or anything to that effect. And I think being able to trust that scientists are doing the right thing and understanding what we're doing, I think would help a lot in terms of making the general public sort of agree with the policy decisions that the public health officials are making. And that's one of the things that we struggle with. You know, we can put so much information out there, but how does the general public then able to take that and make it meaningful to them so that they can understand how to translate that into some way to help protect themselves and reduce their risk of exposure?
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Shanna. And I'll probably follow up with you with a question in a minute. And I'm going to go over to Greg. And what I'd ask Greg is if you can maybe talk about this a little bit more from a policy perspective. If you can lend a little bit of insight into maybe where we should be going with legal approaches, or possibly with you know, the federal executive.
Thanks, Justin. I'm actually going to flip the script a little bit and talk about what we should have learned and what we should not have learned from the zombie apocalypse genre, because I think there's some valuable lessons that cross over pretty well. I think one of the good lessons is that to expect the unexpected, right? We're not very good about predicting pandemics. They're usually a surprise, just like your typical zombie outbreak catches everyone in the book or the movie by surprise. And we've had a really bad track record of predicting what the next pandemic will be. Back in 2005, we were worried about a strain of flu called H5N1 coming out of birds in China and causing a global pandemic. And instead, what we saw in 2009 was a strain called H1N1 coming out of pigs in Mexico. So we just did not have our eyes in the right place. And so I think that's just a warning sign that we can't take for granted that we know what Mother Nature is going to do next, because we just don't. Also, there's an expectation that we're going to know what the origin story of SARS-CoV-2 is, right? We'll be able to identify when that virus went bad, when it jumped over from animals to human in that spillover event. But I think the reality is going to be more like what we saw in The Walking Dead or World War Z, where we never really learned what the origin of the virus is that causes the zombie outbreak. I think the epidemiology of SARS-CoV-2 and the nature of the Chinese economy is such that there probably was a spillover event somewhere in central China weeks and weeks before the doctors in Wuhan started seeing it. And I think there was an event because of the incubation period, the asymptomatic nature of many of the cases that virus probably traveled to Wuhan, and then it spread and became an observable outbreak in the community. And it just so happens there was a BSL-4 lab in Wuhan, which got a lot of attention. But again, that's because in every zombie movie, right, the virus is caused by the mad scientists working in the biosafety lab. And in this case, I just think it's probably a coincidence. But it's one that we're primed to suspect given our sci-fi readings. Another important point is the importance of the human factor, right? In most zombie literature, humans are as much of a threat as zombies. Right, early on, it's because of fear and ignorance and misinformation, disinformation. Later on, right, humans are a threat because it's a matter of survival. Right, it's a zero-sum game, and if you have what I need, I'm going to take it if I can in order to survive the zombies. And I think we're seeing patterns of that as well in terms of the international competition over resources, which really is misguided. Right, during a global pandemic, right, we should be seeing great power cooperation, not great power competition. So I think that's an important lesson we should have learned. The one thing I think that a lesson I think we learned that it was not helpful for our pandemic response is the idea of how visible the threat is, because viruses are much harder to see and fight than zombies. When you're infected by a zombie, right, there's a bite mark, a very obvious indicator you've been infected. It's very easy to see the zombies coming or hear them coming from a distance away, right? Viruses are invisible. As we've seen with SARS-CoV-2, a number of the cases are asymptomatic, right? So without extensive testing of everybody, even if they don't look sick, right, we have no way of knowing who's actually infected and who can infect others. And it's the asymptomatic nature of this virus, I think, that's caused a particular challenge for our public health system. And it's something that we really need to get a handle on. So I think there are definitely some good lessons to learn, but there are a couple kind of things that we should have kind of been more prepared for and not been too lulled in the false sense of security that just because it's not a giant flaming meteor, just because it's not a flesh-eating zombie, right? There's still threats out there that we need to be prepared for and to respond to.
Great. A great perspective and good points across the board, and great segue into bringing the zombie piece more into the conversation. And with that, I'd like to talk to Max a little bit about his perspective as an author, especially in your book World War Z. You took the perspective of a person who was going and actually researching the aftermath of a zombie outbreak and going around and collecting information on behalf of a UN commission that was studying the zombie apocalypse. So definitely a lessons learned perspective in that book. And I think that's a very poignant way to sort of look at the current challenge that we're having. Based on that, the research that you've done for that, and obviously quite a bit that you put into it, what do you think that we're missing, and what kind of lessons should we be learning that we would have to apply to the zombie apocalypse?
Well, I can tell you that in the research I've done for World War Z and my subsequent books, and also the fact that those books have brought me into think tank world. And as a regular schmuck who doesn't have a doctor in front of my name, I have got to go deep into the halls of the Smarty Smarts and listen to these amazing lectures and these symposiums about these mega threats and these mega trends. And then I go back to my hotel room, and that's not on the news. And I go back to my group of friends who are, I think, fairly well educated, and no one's ever heard of all this. And what I've gathered in the decade of this work is the biggest threat to us as a nation is the gap between the American people and those who protect them. And we really see that with this, because one of the reasons this has been such a devastating plague in the United States is it's a generational problem. The fact that if this had hit us 40 years ago, there would have been enough Americans still alive and in positions of authority who still remember the dark days of polio and whooping cough, the pre-vaccine days, when viruses and bacteria used to kill or cripple a large portion of our population. I get my name, Max, from my grandpa, Max, who died of TB when he was 30 years old, because this is before penicillin. That's all gone. The majority of Americans today, even the elderly, grew up post-World War II and don't have the muscle memory, the gut terror of germs. That's why we are where we are today, because you can understand something, but you don't get it in your heart and in your soul. So what do we do about that? What do we do about the fact now that you have an army of very smart, very educated, sometimes that's not the same thing, people who know what they're dealing with, but don't know how to communicate it to the power base? And Dr. Fort Detrick said this earlier. I would quote the great Eddie Murphy, who said, it's not worth a warm bucket of hamster vomit. If you can't take this knowledge and don't communicate it to your boss, and by your boss, I mean the American voter and the American taxpayer, that's where the power is. Because you can't do things like this, right? Great book. I had to read this. You know, look at that. Listen to this. Hear that sound? That is the sound of failure. Because if you can't take what's in there and make the average American understand it, then our leadership, our intelligentsia, our educated thinking class of people have failed. And that's the problem. And that's where the artist comes in. And that's what we used to do. In World War II, Roosevelt, his government, they would huddle. How do we do this? How do we defeat Japan? How do we defeat Germany? How do we aid the Brits and the Soviets? How do we do this? And then they figured out a plan, and then they said, Hollywood, come here. No, you too, Walt Disney. Yes, I know how you feel. We have to go to war against Hitler. So how do we do this? How do you take your movies, your cartoons, your radio shows, your books, your plays? How do you make America understand why we fight? And that actually used to be a show, Why We Fight. So it's all hands on deck in the mass communication department. We need to think of creative ways of distilling the essence of what all of you understand and make people like me understand why it's worth it. Because we can do it. Even when we were all kids, we had Schoolhouse Rock. We can do that again. Look, here's our plan. Here it is. Biological index. It could be a Schoolhouse Rock. Report PPE needs, which can involve utilization of the Defense Production Act, DPA. Oh, yeah. Between your army and the army of the American people is another army of storytellers. And they need to be brought on board. Because if we don't do that, if we don't bridge the gap, nothing you do will save us.
Oh, yeah. I totally get where you're coming from on the next. I will tell you, I think that sometimes there is a bit of an information loss or a loss of translation somewhere. So that's a great point, and you're definitely right. There was a concerted effort in many cases in the past to do that, and maybe that's an art that we've lost. But you, as a storyteller, are one of the people who works with us to hopefully tell the stories a little bit better. So, and we definitely appreciate that perspective. Well, let me open it up also to questions from our chat audience. Please send them in on the chat function on your WebEx browser. You should be able to click on the little chat balloon in order to send us questions, and we'll post them. Please also, if you have a person that you want it asked to, let us know who that individual is, and we will absolutely try to get that question answered. I don't know if we'll have time for every question that comes in, but we've had a couple that have come in thus far, and I'm going to ask one, and I think I'm going to throw this one to Greg. In looking at the 2018 National Biodefense Strategy, there were a lot of concepts presented in there. It was a fairly broad and sometimes non-specific, and I looked at it quite a bit myself at the time, a document, but is the issue with that document that it wasn't specific enough, or did we have poor implementation of it, or was it just not mature enough, or were we overly optimistic?
That's a great question. The National Biodefense Strategy that came out in 2018, I think, is actually a really good document. It is very comprehensive. They have a very broad definition of what biological threats we should be worried about, everything ranging from naturally occurring infectious diseases to pandemics to bioterrorism. They incorporate the idea of One Health. the idea that animal and human health is inextricably linked, and we need to look at animal health population if we're going to look at protecting human health as well. And there was some good kind of structure and organization behind it as well. But there are two problems. One is no one actually implemented the strategy. The administration's priorities were completely going the other way in terms of funding what needed to be funded under the strategy. So even before the COVID-19 pandemic occurred, the strategy just wasn't being resourced or actually followed in any way. And once the pandemic hit, I think that strategy was like what happened with the book that Max had, right? Someone threw it on the floor and left it there, and has not been followed in any way over the last several months. So again, great document. Just it proved to be of no real use during the pandemic for political reasons.
Okay. Anybody else want to comment on that one?
The national security strategy also had a big section about the importance of health security and how to deal with health security threats. It's words on paper unless you have leaders who are going to make decisions against them. And as long as they were just going to relegate it to like, that's what doctors or scientists do, not important, then it's going to not be actually implemented.
I can jump in too with that. I can say from a big picture point of view was after even the First World War, we used to have a wholeness of nation concept when it came to national security. We used to have an overall strategy about how do we prepare for big crisis, and that trickled down to everything. The whole reason we had a national education system was to make sure that these kids could read and write and do basic math if they had to be called into the Army. So the Army wouldn't have to waste time on that. You could plug them right in. The whole reason we had a national nutrition standard was so if we needed these people, these young recruits, they were in decent enough shape and their teeth weren't falling out. We used to do all this to prepare our population as a giant insurance policy in case the nation was threatened. And you've seen this, especially in the post-Cold War era, being dismantled at every single level. We need to get back to that notion of wholeness of national concept, because you can't jump in at the last minute. The Army is way ahead of this. And I can tell you this from working in the Modern War Institute. The Army is furious over ditching the national nutrition standard. You can't reverse 18 years of fat, salt, and sugar and Xbox with a few months of basic training. Well, it's the same thing with education when it comes to viruses. You can't gut science teachers. You can't pay science teachers pennies and not teach kids about basic science and the scientific method and what it means to look at data when they're little kids. And then suddenly when they're grown-ups, expect them to learn about airborne droplet theory. You can't do that. You've got to start when the brain is easily taught. And then by the time they're grown-ups, they go, oh yeah, that's what my science teacher taught me about. Oh, it can be an airborne virus versus oh, I get it, right.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, education starts at a young age, and obviously that's very germane to the discussion on how we get the general population involved. I guess I would follow that up with the question to you then, Max, which is bringing all this together, as you said, this oneness concept. How do we better get scientists, policymakers, the military, and creators together to row the boat together for a challenge like this, or the challenge of the zombie apocalypse?
I think honestly, and I've had the same discussion with special forces because they're having a problem in the tech world. They can't get the tech industry on board because they come in with their high-end tights and their erect posture after having run 10 miles in the morning, and they go into Silicon Valley. And these people look at them and they don't trust them. The tech business doesn't trust the Army any more than the Army trusts me when I walk in because I'm not of them. Everyone is very tribalized now. So I tell the Army, don't try to recruit them. Recruit a recruiter. Bring a few people from that world into your world and make them ambassadors back to their world and say, listen, you know me, you trust me. Trust me when I tell you this matters. It's the same thing in the biological defense world. If the bio world were to tap just a few more artists and bring them in and say, listen, you're doing a great job with your zombie TV show or your zombie books or whatever, but there's a couple sort of basic facts that if you get right, you can really help educate the public. It drives me crazy when I see my fellow artists grab the American public and have their attention and then don't do anything with it. Just waste it, because it didn't used to be that way. Every episode of Star Trek had not only hard science behind it, but also a morality tale behind it. And it doesn't take that much to get back to it. So I think more of an introduction from your world to my world at places like Comic-Con would make a huge difference. And we know, because remember when we talked about my comic book Germ Warfare, and we did that at Awesome Con, and the room was packed. And when the hands went up for questions, they were not for me. They were for the experts. The public is hungry. The public wants to learn. So present more forums where there's an opportunity for the public to learn, and teach more teachers.
Thank you. I'm going to ask the science people a question real quick. Jarod, I'd like to ask you a question from one of our audience members. In pop culture, as Max is used to producing, we portray a very specific kind of threat. Usually it's something with a very high case fatality rate. You know, you see a movie like Contagion, which obviously, you know, has some real world implications, and there's some corollaries there to what we're seeing. Or maybe the zombie apocalypse. It implies a very direct threat to individuals. But with COVID, that risk is much lower, and as a result, people respond differently than they do to something like Ebola, where you have case fatality rates of 39 or 65 or whatever %. And they don't really maybe touch the U.S. as much as coronavirus has. So what is our responsibility as science folks, and how can we communicate the risk even if it's not the flesh-eating zombie?
I think overall we have to do a better job of getting people to understand the number of unknowns with all of these things. So any and all of those things you just mentioned could be true with any new pandemic. So it could have a high case fatality rate, it could have a low one. We just don't know going into it. And like we've seen with COVID, it's varied tremendously by region. So I think we really have to do a better job of saying, this is what we know now, and we're going to continue to improve upon it. We've got to be honest with people. I think when at the start, there was lots of popular media saying, you know, this doesn't have a higher death rate than, or higher fatality rate than flu. Well, we now know that's false. So how do we go about not losing our credibility there, and by adequately setting the stage for, this is what the mortality was in China, using these very strictly implemented policies. Once we got to a completely different cohort of people, like in Italy, that mortality rate changed dramatically. And I think that's what we have to get people prepared for, is that there will be lots of unknowns. There always are. And we need to advance our knowledge as we go. Just like was mentioned by one of the speakers before, just the sheer amount of new scientific data that's come out in the last few months related to COVID in rapid succession. I mean, we've never seen science put out that quickly. I mean, entire labs, entire departments of various governments have stopped and completely focused on COVID. We've never seen that happen before. So how do we get people to understand that the science is constantly evolving? Your knowledge needs to evolve with it. You can't say, well, I heard back in January it had the same flu or same fatality rate as flu. It doesn't. We now know that's completely false. But at the time, it seemed like that was plausible, but it was plausible for a very specific scenario that wasn't replicated world over. It could have been, it just wasn't. And again, we've got to do a better job setting the stage and really just focusing on, this is what we know now. These are the facts as we know them today. These facts are going to change tomorrow. You need to be prepared to move on with that, because again, that's the only way we're going to actually implement measures that actually work, like getting rid of hydroxychloroquine and understanding what agents or what therapeutics actually do have an effect. So I think just trying to set the stage show some humility in a way and say, we don't know everything, but this is what we know today based on this very limited scenario. And I think that goes a long way to helping build credibility.
Great. Shanna, any inputs on that from your angle in terms of the research? How do we energize the base to get the support behind the kind of research that's going to be necessary in a future, or even a preventative measures that we would have for a similar outbreak in the future? And how do we get that to be important to the average person?
Sure. So, I mean, I hate to, it seems like we're touching on this quite a bit, but I definitely want to reiterate that one of the things I think would help a lot is if there was a more general understanding of the scientific method and the scientific process. Everybody wants everything to be black and white. Unfortunately, scientists will give you 100 caveats to every white or black, right? And so having people understand that you're not going to get definitive answers right away, that there is a process to it, and that we're going as fast as we can, definitely would go a long way. And again, that comes back to early education and focusing more and investing more specifically in STEM, so that there is a better understanding of that process as a community. I also do think that, especially in the US, we tend to have a very short attention span. So we sort of shifted everything to deal with the 2012 Ebola situation, and then Congress was slow to put money into that and to fund that research. By the time all the money was allocated for that, we now had to shift to Zika, and all of those funds got moved over. And then as that sort of dwindled away, we sort of lost touch and forgot about it, and here we are again. And so as a country, specifically from the US standpoint, we tend to only put out fires. We don't tend to think or be forward thinking. And I think that's one place where I'm hoping that this will finally be where we've learned our lesson and we move forward to be prepared in the future. And that, once a vaccine or an effective countermeasure or whatever does finally put a stop to this particular pandemic happens, that we don't just go back to as it was, and we really start to think about, well, how are we going to be prepared for when the zombie apocalypse actually does happen? And I would like to see us actually go there and not just forget 3 months after the fact and go back to life as it was, because that would be a huge mistake, and this would, to some degree, be all for naught.
Fair enough. Let me ask a question to Craig and Gigi that came up. Understanding that we may not be able to predict our next outbreak, how can we best posture technological change and the investments we need to make in R&D to respond more real time to the next pandemic? Greg?
So I think, again, taking on the lesson of expect the unexpected, we should be really looking at platform technologies, technologies that enable us to respond rapidly to a range of different types of threats, whether it's in terms of diagnostics or in terms of developing new vaccines or countermeasures, but trying not to get sucked into, okay, the next pandemic will be another version of coronavirus. But again, taking a broader look and recognizing that we can't predict ahead of time what the next threat's going to be. So these kind of platform technologies that are usable against multiple different biological hazards, I think is the right kind of approach to take to kind of prepare for the next outbreak, whatever the source is.
I would add to that.
Yep.
Yeah, I would add to that investing in international collaboration. I mean, because that is something that's really worked in this pandemic, and those relationships don't get built overnight. And programs that do that, like the Biological Threat Reduction Program and other programs, even in the BRAIN Initiative at NIH, programs that bring scientists from different countries together are worth it, because they will help to communicate in a crisis.
Great. Anybody else get something, Shanna?
I was just going to say, leadership is one of the big things here, because to some degree you sort of need, especially on the international community, to get the countries to sort of work together to try to find a resolution, to put all our resources together. We can't do it alone. We need each other, and sort of having the right leadership, even to sort of reassemble and holistically look at this problem after this is over, is very critical. And there was this discussion about how do we start to bring back this sort of general perception from the public about what's happening. Well, part of that, how do you assemble? How do you share it with the public? How do you socialize it? How do you create public relations campaigns? A lot of that is going to have to be initiated by our leadership to basically get that implemented, because it's not going to happen from the bottom. Unfortunately, it has to sort of come from the top. We need sort of guidance to get that to happen, especially on the international level.
Right. Jarod, did you have something you wanted to put out on that as well?
I did. I was just going to add in that it really needs to be a multi-pronged or multifaceted approach as well. It can't just be the government. It can't just be NGOs or places like the Gates Foundation. It's really got to be a combination of all of those entities together. those NGOs can get places the governments can't in a lot of cases, and certain government organizations like the military can get in places where NGOs may not be able to because of safety concerns and other concerns they would have. So I really think you've got to focus on sort of a whole of government, a whole of, honestly, the world approach, where you actually focus on how do we get access to these areas where we think those emerging threats are going to come from, and via any means possible, where we can actually then get that information back out and shared. If you look at, China was sitting on potentially a treasure trove of coronaviruses that hadn't really been shared. It was all being studied by an NGO along with them. So there's valuable information that's sitting out there, and how do we get that shared and disseminated as widely as possible so we can make the best informed decisions going forward on what the real risks are. What's the most likely risk versus, a biodefense weapon that may take a lot of expertise in a very high dollar lab to make versus something that's going to show up because you had a duck next to a dog next to a pig. That's the more likely scenario worldwide of how you get reassortant viruses, is when you put those three species together with humans. So how do we actually move on from where we are now and actually focus on the real threats, the ones that are really most likely to happen, regardless of how costly they may be? Again, with COVID, we've seen a low lethality disease is going to cost us trillions of dollars globally, and there's going to be a cost to that in lives too. So,
great point.
I was
going to redirect to you, Max. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say that I think we also need to change the culture of public health and make it national security, because it's one and the same. Because you can't tell me that right now around this planet, there aren't people in Beijing and Moscow and Pyongyang and Tehran and wherever who have seen a microbe bring the world to its knees and are not thinking, we need to bottle something like this. And I think we need to take biodefense as seriously as we take any other form of national security seriously. That means a substantial investment, and it also means long-term contracts, because you can't let the biomedical sector marketplace run itself. Otherwise, it's going to be the year 2000 again, and all we're going to get is a bigger, better boner pill. That's what they're doing, because that's where the money is. We need to take biodefense as seriously as we take airspace defense, Space Force, undersea. I would like to see the same amount of money put into a bioshield as the Virginia-class submarine, the M1 Abrams tank, or the F-35, which, to my knowledge, hasn't saved one American life.
Okay. Priorities are always a challenge, and unfortunately, politics gets involved in that. So that's a tough one to crack. I do want to ask one more question to you, Max, before I do my final question. And real quick answer on this one, if you wouldn't mind, because this is a good question. It seems the narrative and mass communication is definitely out there. It's available. You talk about partnering storytellers with scientists and policymakers, which is great. But it's revolved around minimizing the threat and emphasizing recovery. For more expansive government strategy, like you even talked about, or Gigi talked about, how do we rebut charges of heavy-handed propaganda that come with it?
Well, I mean, I think that the problem is it's not propaganda if it's truth. And you do that by honoring American journalists. You do not call them the enemy of the people. You do not attack them as an institution. I think our journalists are what validate our government systems, keeping us all honest. The Chinese are stuck. The Chinese have died because they didn't know the truth. We're dying because we don't know what is the truth. That's the difference. When you have the President of the United States attacking journalists as an enemy of the people and sowing doubt and mistrust, then you have the voters who don't know who to trust. So even if journalists might bust your ass in the short term, you need to honor it as an institution, because without a free press, we're China.
Okay, I'm going to ask one final question for everybody, and just give me as a quick, unfortunately, we're going to run out of time here, so give me as short an answer as you can to this one, and I think this is a great final question. If you were drafting a superhero team that was composed of the right figures to manage the current outbreak or the zombie apocalypse, who would you have on that superhero team? And I'm going to start with Shanna.
Can we come back?
You don't have to say names. You don't have to say names. You can just say like the type of person that should be on it if you don't want to say
Oh man, I'm trying to think of which superhero has the best PPE right now, because to me that seems like the biggest way to keep yourself from being infected. So I'm like racking my brain trying to think of who would be out there, but it's definitely someone who's got Spider-Man, because you got to have some sort of mask that's going to protect you, and I think that would shield a lot of particles. So I'm going to go with Spider-Man.
Okay, yeah. But let's say real world people, who would you recruit? Who would you draft onto the team? What would be the representative group of people you might say, I definitely need to have this guy or this gal? Who would you say would be the right person to be able to bring the assets to bear for a pandemic response if we had a zombie outbreak?
I can't think of a specific name, but I will say there are a lot of really brilliant scientists who are really terrible at talking about science to the general public. So what I would look for is somebody who can take what most brilliant scientists say and translate it so that what we say is more effective to the general public and is received better and therefore implemented better. So looking for somebody to do that on the team. I think that is one of the things that's probably currently missing.
Fair enough.
No specific person, but yeah.
All right. Jarod, same question. Superhero team, go.
All right, so not really a superhero, but it would be Dr. Evil, because every team needs that evil genius that thinks outside of the box. And I think that's one of the things we're really missing right now are those people that think outside the box and think what could happen, not I'm basing it on the 10 things that happened previously, but what's that thing that's going to happen next? Those people are very hard to find. So, and I think that's the kind of person you need. From a popular figure, I would actually pick somebody like the Pope. You need somebody who can unite the masses. And that's what's missing right now globally is who's that one person that can unite us all and say, this is the cohesive strategy going forward. And it's somebody in that sort of position that's going to do it. And historically, it always has been. So
interesting point on that one. And with Dr. Evil, you do get sharks with laser beams attached to their heads. So that's pretty cool too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Greg, question for you, same thing.
Sure. Well, I think I have to say that Iron Man probably is the best PPE of the superheroes. So I would go with him. But if we're talking about real people, then I think again, if you're looking for a team, you need to have folks who have expertise in epidemiology, in infection prevention and control, in communication, as was pointed out before, microbiology, and you need people who can bridge that gap between the science and the public, right? People like Max and other storytellers who can help translate some of those concepts and those themes, not just into things people understand, but things that are actually actionable, right? It's one thing to know that this virus has a R0 of 2 or has a case fatality rate of 10%. But what does that mean for the average person? How do you prevent yourself from getting infected? How do you keep yourself and your family safe? That's really at the end of the day, that's what we really need to be getting the type of message out.
Great. And Gigi, same question.
So I would like to see the director of the CDC getting out there every day with a team, a very well-funded team behind him and her, and boring us silly with all these great things that the government is doing to make us safer, and working with a director of a well-funded World Health Organization to try and get trials in place so that we can get a vaccine ASAP.
All right, great. And finally, Max, your superhero team.
Rupert Murdoch. He reaches more people than anyone in the world. He's dumbed down the public more than anyone in the world. If we could turn him and get him to understand that this is serious, he would tell all of his minions, from Tucker Carlson to Hannity to all those British tabloids, listen, this is serious. And then the president would watch Fox and realize, oh, well, if Fox says it, it must be true. And then he would make it national policy and we win.
All right, fair enough. Hey, with that, we've reached our rope limit for this. I just want to say, first of all, to our audience, thanks so much. Some great questions asked here that I related to the group. So I want to thank every one of you for doing that. The people whose questions I did end up asking, I've got your names here. You're going to get a special prize for asking your questions today, a set of the Zombie Survival Guide cards from Random House. So you're going to get those here probably in the next 2 weeks or so. Thanks so much for asking those questions. We'll get those sent out to you. I know who you are. And then I also want to, of course, thank all of my great panelists Jarod, Shanna, Greg, Gigi, and Max, thank you so much for being on with us and for sharing this time and talking a little bit about not only the challenges we have going on, but how we approach them in the future, and of course, how we can apply that to the zombie apocalypse. I know we didn't get into, flesh eating and Max's concept that you don't need to reload a blade, but it was great having you guys on, and thanks so much for all of your viewpoints and for sharing your perspectives and your intellect with us.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Be safe.
Thanks.
Thank you.